picture, which is there. And there we are. So you should now see this wonderful picture by Mark McNeil Photography of the world famous Sycamore Gap tree, or as many people know it, the Kevin Costner tree, which is just a wonderful place to be. And that's just up the road from one of the observatories that's collaborating with us in this festival. That's deep in the Northumberland National Park. Now this year, because of the pandemic, the festival is entirely online. And obviously, whilst we absolutely hope to see you at our respective observatories in the Dark Sky Park, whenever lockdown is lifted and we're allowed to do that again, the fantastic thing about being able to do online stuff is we've got a whole load of international and national speakers who otherwise wouldn't have been able to join us. And we're able to access a far bigger audience. So there's some pros and there's some cons, but obviously we do want to see you under our dark skies in the near future, hopefully. And look at that. So this is a picture by Dan Monk of Kielder Observatory, the longest established and possibly the biggest and best observatory in the Northumberland Dark Sky Park, the jewel in the crown, as it were. And Kielder Observatory are working with Stonehoff Astronomy, up in the village of Stonehoff. Stonehoff Observatory has just recently been kind of built there, the warm room. But if you want to find them, they are Stonehoff Astronomy on Facebook. And Liam is also, he works at Kielder Observatory. Then we have the Twice Brewed Observatory just up the road from the Sycamore Gap. And this is the view from the out of the roof of the Twice Brewed Observatory that I believe came online last year. And last but not least, the observatory that I helped design and build, and me and my team manage, the Battlestones Observatory in the village of Wark, which is on the road up to Bellingham in Northumberland. And that's a picture by Dr. Martin Kitching. So lots of places to visit when lockdown is over. And as soon as we're allowed to travel around the UK, we hope that we can welcome you into one of our observatories. We've got the chat going. A few of you have used that. Please do ask questions in there of Natasha. I will write them down and I will make a note to ask your questions of her at the end. And please be kind, especially about our live streaming skills. Finally, the very final thing from me before I do hand you over to Natasha is that we are absolutely committed to supporting the growth and development of dark skies, not just in rural areas, but in urban areas around the world, but particularly in our region. And we do that by working with the International Dark Sky Association. Their mission is to preserve and protect the night sky environment for a number of different reasons that I won't go into now. But if you want to get involved, head over to their website. There's all kinds of news and research. You can join, you can gift memberships, and there are various clubs and things that go on around the world. And it's just a great way to get into dark sky activism and be aware of what dark sky activism is. So with that, Natasha, I will close that and I will hand over to you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've just popped up my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Let me know if you can't in the chat. Thank you so much, Roy, and thank you everybody who's tuned in. Thank you everybody who's tuned in for bearing with us while we got a new link sorted. We're not sure what happened there, but it happens, doesn't it? So thanks, Roy, for just talking us through all of the observatories that are part of the Dark Sky Festival and for sort of introducing this project. So welcome to the Escape Velocity project that's running. This is the workshop that we're doing today. Now, this project is an art outreach project with Kielder Observatory, which is the observatory that I work for. This is part of this Dark Sky Festival that we're celebrating online, lots of different observatories working collaboratively. And this project that we're going to be going through and looking into is funded by actually Northumberland County Council and the Northumberland Cultural Fund. So thank you very much for that, for making this possible. So before we get on with the project and with the workshop that's involved, I just want to, first of all, talk about where I work. I know that Roy has already introduced it, but just to really show you where I work, it's a fantastic place. So this picture here is of the observatory. Roy showed it also. This is Kielder Observatory under a really beautiful starry sky during one of our events. And this is a public outreach facility. It's one of some of the observatories that are in the Dark Sky Park of Northumberland. And this is where we work 5 nights a week pre-COVID. And it's a beautiful place. 2 telescopes are housed in those turrets, those square turrets you can see. There is a classroom just off to the left, and we have another observatory where we do some astrophotography. So we run events, we deliver public outreach sessions up there, we let the public use our telescopes, and we're really enthusiastic about doing that. Alongside our event schedule, we also have education, arts and science outreach programs. So we're thrilled to have been working since 2008 and to be part of this festival too. So we actually have a really cool team at the observatory. I just wanted to give a little bit of a nod to them because they are a huge part of how we do our work. First off, the building, that is part of the team. It's a piece of architecture from somebody called Charles Barkley Architects, and you can see it there with the Milky Way, a nice panoramic shot. And at the bottom, we have our team. There's Catherine on the bottom right. She's our CEO. She keeps us all in line and helps to direct all of our projects outwards and get us doing what we do best, which is talking about space. In the middle, we have lots of different people who are our science communication team. They're an interesting bunch. They're from a range of different backgrounds and different disciplines. There are mathematicians, there are physicists, there are people who have practical use of telescopes, voiceover actors. We have a whole bunch. And then probably the most important people on the bottom left there, that's our admin team who do all of the magic that nobody really gets to see. So that is our lovely team. We work, as do all of the astronomers at observatories. We live and work under dark skies in the International Dark Sky Park. This is a really huge area in the northeast of England. It's actually one of the largest areas of protected dark skies. It's extremely special to us because we get to show people objects in space and talk about celestial objects, planets, galaxies, all these cool things in an area where we can really appreciate it. If you've been keeping up with all of the Dark Sky Festival events, you'll probably have heard about light pollution already. And the image of Europe on the left, you can see, that shows us that light pollution is a huge problem. There's so much artificial light spilling up into the sky, and that stops us from seeing the universe. So we live and work and are really pleased to be in this Dark Sky Park, which has been given to us by the International Dark Sky Association that Roy mentioned. So that's just a bit about who we are, what we do, and an introduction to our team. But who am I? I just want to tell you who I am so that you have an understanding of me, because I'll be delivering the project to you. My name is Tasha, and that's me in the top left there that you can see, with my own telescope. And I am an astronomer and the leader of the arts program at the observatory. So what that means is I oversee and develop all of the projects to do with the arts that we have as an organisation. I'm also an artist and photographer myself, and in this slide here are some of my works. There's a painting nestled in there, there's some photographs, and there's some rather interesting photographs. That bubble, for example, there is the town square of Prague reflected in a bubble. And I thought it was important to show you some of my work, because as we go through the project and we talk about the different things, we will see how every single photograph that an artist takes can tell a story. And there's stories in all of these. And the one with the bubble, that story was me chasing bubbles in Prague, which is a really interesting story. Aside from being into all the art stuff, I'm also studying with the Open University. I'm trying my best to get through an astrophysics degree. So I'm trying to kind of have a grasp on all things and definitely be a master of none of them. So that's me. What we're here to do today is to get you guys to take part in the Escape Velocity project. Now, this project is all to do with being creative, and we want you to achieve something with your creativity called escape velocity. Now, initially, when we developed this project, we wanted you to achieve escape velocity in almost a literal sense. And escape velocity refers to, if you will, the speed that a rocket needs to go to overcome the gravity of Earth. So if you think about a rocket that's trying to get out into space, achieve enough thrust to do that, it needs to travel at about 7 miles per second to do so. That's pretty quick. So we wanted people to go 7 miles from their home to explore dark skies. We have, of course, got COVID-19 guidelines that are in place, and this means that we can't do that. But what we can do is we can travel into space figuratively with our imaginations, and that's what artists do, isn't it? They imagine. So what we're asking you to do in Escape Velocity is to do just that, to explore the universe in a really creative way. And we want you to do it with mobile astrophotography, photography that you can do with the mobiles that we all have. So essentially, we've designed this project in such a way that it is for families and it is for young children and young adults. If you are an adult and you don't have children and you're just watching yourself, you can, of course, take part. We're not going to say you can't, but the design of it is such that it's aimed for people who are new to photography, who are new to astrophotography. And so the topics kind of will present it as such. If you do want to ask a little bit more of an advanced question, or you've got something in particular you want to know, just ask. It's absolutely grand too. And if you're a kid and you've got a question specifically, feel free to ask too. There will be points during the project where we ask you to join in and just to pop something in the comments, so please feel free to. So what are we going to get up to? So we are going to, first of all, we're going to explore photography in quite a little bit of detail. As I say, we're going to assume that you're a little bit newer to the word photography, to the art of it, to the practice of it. So we're going to explore photography, different types, how we can do it, how cameras work, all these things. Then we're going to discover something called astrophotography, which is a particular type of photography that astronomers love doing. And I love astrophotography. Roy loves astrophotography. And so we'll be looking into that, how it's different and why it's so special. And then finally, we'll look at mobile phone astrophotography. So how we can do these incredible night sky images that take all of the elements of photography and astrophotography and just do them with a click of a button. Once we've gone through all of that, we will be giving you a mission directive, and we will be asking you to go out and to discover something about dark skies with your mobile. So hopefully that makes sense. So first of all, what we're going to chat about is what photography is initially. So photography for me is very much an art form. So some people might not see it as such, but it definitely is. And photography is where a photographer, that's the person taking the photograph, they use a camera to take an image of the subject. And subject in photography is a really broad term. It can mean lots of different things. The subject could be your dog that's doing something funny outside. It could be a beautiful mountain range that you've been inspired to stop by. It could be a moment that happens at home and you just think, I've got to get a picture of that. It could be an object. So it could be lots of different things. And what's wonderful about photography is there is no limit to how creative you can be with it. And it doesn't matter what you take your photograph with. It just matters that you're enjoying what you're photographing. So when we think about photography as capturing more than the subject, we can actually ask lots of questions about the environment and the object we're photographing. We can express different emotions and tell different stories. And we can also say something about ourselves with our photographs. So these are some more of my photographs. And you can see I've actually got quite a distinct style. You could tell from the other slide that had some of my work too. If I'm looking at a photograph that I've taken, I know that it's mine. And similar with my colleagues, if I look at their photography, I know it's them because they have a particular way of taking a photo that says something about them. And just to kind of emphasize how these can really tell stories, I just want to talk you through a couple of them because they have stories behind them. So this large image on the left-hand side, this is an alleyway in Edinburgh. So when I visited Edinburgh, I really loved how the city looked at night. And I saw that off the main high street, there were lots of alleyways that were intriguing and mysterious. And they led to restaurants, they led to galleries, they led to all these different places. And so I went around the city and I photographed all of these alleyways just to try and discover what was going on down there. And each of the photos to me was really interesting because it kind of invites you to walk down the alley. You've got this lovely line of lights. You've got this unexpected little flare of greenery at the top with those vines. And so it tells you a little bit of a story. It's a moment of exploration. It's a moment of discovery, and it looks pretty good too. So you can do the same with all of these different photos. The one on the top there, the steeple, that's actually in Edinburgh, again in Scotland. It is through the gate of Edinburgh Castle. I went to visit it as a tourist and I thought, there's so many people here, I can't get an appreciation for the architecture. I can't get an appreciation for what things look like. So I stuck my camera above my head and I took a photo through the gate of the steeple. There's no people there. There's no noise, no busyness, and you wouldn't know that I took that photo in the middle of a flock of people. So all of these photos can tell really important stories, and that's something that's really special. So we can think about the types of photography that we can do as photographers, and this is where, if you want to put in the comments one of your favorite types of photography, you can do. Maybe it's one that we don't touch on, maybe it's one that you're particularly good at or that you're interested in, but we're going to cover a few basic types that are commonly used in the world of photography. But just bear in mind, there's loads of them. There's so many types of photography, down to even food photography for people who photograph their food for Instagram. So there's a little bit of everything. So you could photograph whatever you like. Don't feel that you just have to do these types. The first type is landscape photography. So landscape photography is, as the name suggests, the photographer will go out and they might find something that is very important that they can see. Maybe it will be some mountains, a river, maybe rolling fields, maybe some buildings that are in the landscape that they can see. And they'll photograph that. And here we've got a photograph of the observatory. And we've got a little rainbow that's just going into it there. And that's a really cool landscape photo. You've got the hills in the background, you've got the open sky, you've got the building, and then a little bonus of a rainbow. So that's a landscape photo. And you'll be very familiar with these when you've seen photos around on the internet. The next type of photography that's really large, is a big, big market for it, and lots of people do it, is portrait photography. This is where the photographer, their subject is a person or some people, usually one person, two people, maybe a few more. And portrait photography can either be very planned, where you're asking the subject to pose, or it can be very candid, where you catch them on a whim and you capture them in a human moment. So usually, if you think about portrait photography, you might think when you have your school photos done and you have to sit there and you have to wait for the person to take the photo and you feel really uncomfortable and you never like how you look. And then maybe your friend takes a random photo of you and you think, actually, that's really cool because they've captured you a little bit off guard. Portrait photography tends to focus on the subject very closely, so it's not very wide out. It does kind of zoom in on the person and give them the full kind of feature in the photograph. This photo here is my friend Jessie. I asked her to turn around. She didn't know I was taking the photo. And so she looks a little bit like, what are you doing? And that's a candid portrait shot, but you can see she is the focus of the photo quite clearly. So the next type of photography that we'll talk about is something called still life photography. And this is a really broad form of photography. It covers basically everything that you want to take a photo of. So if you think that all of your washing that's on the floor that you haven't picked up for days looks really artistic in the way that all the cloth folds, you could take a photo of it and call that still life photography. If you like how the oranges look in the morning in the bowl on your breakfast table, you could literally take a photo of that and it is still life photography. So basically anything in an arrangement that catches your eye, that is saying something or making a statement, or is just important to you, is considered still life photography. This photograph here, I did stage it just to give an example of still life because I'm not a big still life photographer. But what this is, it's still quite interesting. My partner, he loves to paint, and as you can see, there's a canvas at the top of the picture. He props the canvas on a chair and he covers the chair with plastic. And I liked how the light was bouncing off the plastic. There's some paintbrushes, there's a random plant that I stuck in there because I thought it would look good. And you can see how that says this is the space of an artist. Somebody is painting here. So it tells you something in it. So the next type of photography is something called event photography. Now, you might have thought that I would have gone with a wedding photo for this, but I've never taken a photo at a wedding. I'm not a wedding photographer. People who take photographs at weddings are event photographers, and they're there to make your day when you're getting married look spectacular. They're there to tell a story of your wedding and to make that moment, that day, special and immortalized. So when we think about event photography, we do have to think about weddings, first of all, but event photography can be anything. This is an event photograph. So at the observatory, we hold events, and usually the photos that come out of the observatory are of moons and galaxies and stars, and the building is the foreground of the picture we're taking. But here, this is the people in our event. There's lots of people lined up down the building. There's a few staff members in the front there on the bottom right, and they're all enjoying a moonrise. So they're watching the moon come up over the horizon. Here, we're not interested in the moon. We're not interested in the building. We're interested in the people participating. So event photography does just that. And finally, I'm only listing 5 types. There are probably many, many different types you can think of, but the next type I would probably mention is wildlife photography. And wildlife photography is a huge part of photography. Wildlife photographers are some of the most ingenuous and dedicated photographers you will ever meet, because they are trying to capture something in a natural environment at just the right moment to make it spectacular. So if you've ever followed things like National Geographic or anything like that, you will find that wildlife photographers, they can get some incredible photos. And so it might be waiting for days for this rare animal like a snow leopard to rear its head above a rock, or it might be capturing a hummingbird mid-flight going fishing. Wildlife photographers often try to get plants and animals to create a story. Now, this photo here is of 2 rhinos. Again, I'm not a wildlife photographer, but this photo I did like because it is quite a statement. It is 2 rhinos, a mother and daughter, taken at Chester Zoo. And you can see they're pointing in opposite directions, which is the first fun thing, but they're also on 2 different levels. One of them is stood, one of them is sat. And there is lots of light and shade on the photograph. There's lots of texture on their skin. And so it makes for an interesting composition. So that is my example of wildlife photography. But as with all of these types, there will be so many photographers that you can explore that do these types so well. Okay, so what are you taking your photos with? This is the next thing that we need to touch on when we're talking about photography. There are tons of cameras that are on the market that you can use to take photographs. And I've just broken it down into probably the easiest format I can, and that's just to talk about them one by one. We're not going to go into makes and models, although if you need a recommendation, I certainly can recommend one to you. So typically, when we're thinking about what most people will use as a photographer, they will use a DSLR camera, and that stands for digital single lens reflex camera. And all that means is the camera takes a photograph in a very simple way. Light will enter the lens that's on the front of the camera. It will pass through the camera body, reflect off a mirror, and then that light that's been reflected will hit a sensor. Now, on the sensor of the digital cameras, there's lots of photo sites. These are areas that light fall into, and depending on the programming of your camera, those photo sites will take in a certain amount of light, and then it will actually count the photons, so the particles of light that it's captured, to figure out how the image has been taken. So they're incredibly clever, they're incredibly smart, and they make up the bulk of the market in photography. So there are loads of brands: Nikon, Canon, Sony, Olympus, and quite a few more. If you want to get a DSLR, they will cost you from around £400 upwards. So they are not a cheap option. But they are, when you're wanting to get into photography, they are very good at doing a lot of heavy lifting to make photographs look fantastic. Now, under DSLR there, we have a type of camera called the mirrorless camera. Now, this is just like a DSLR, except it doesn't have that reflex mirror inside of it. So there is nothing that stops the path of light to the sensor. It doesn't need to be reflected. It just goes straight to it. And these are basically, in a way, almost exactly the same as the DSLR, aside from that little small bit. Now, the great thing with the mirrorless and the DSLR is that you can take the lenses off the body of the camera, and you can put on other lenses too. So you get quite a lot of creative control just with the changing of the lens. And that's a really important term, creative control. It's a term that we'll hear again, and it's a term that you might hear going through. And what it means essentially is how much the artist or the photographer can do to influence the way the photo looks. And with your DSLR and your mirrorless, changing the lens is one way to do that. Then we have traditional film cameras. So on the bottom left of the slide there, you can see that is a traditional film camera. Now, if you're a younger person and you're watching this, you might not remember those, but they are the descendants of the very first camera. In the 1800s, the first cameras were film cameras, and they used special photosensitive or light-sensitive film that were locked away in the back of the camera that had to be developed with emulsion, and you needed a dark room to do this. So if you look at that photograph, actually, the chap who's opened the camera there to show you the film, he's ruined any photos he's taken. And these traditional film cameras, they do have a place in photography still. They're very important, but you will see them less. They will be used less than DSLR and mirrorless cameras. And finally, the last camera, which is really coming up in the market, is the cameras that are used in mobile phones. Now, again, depending on your age, you might not remember the Nokia 3310, those very old phones that had no camera. Well, now we have phones that have spectacular cameras that really can make a DSLR camera owner go, oh, I've got all this money on this beautiful camera, and a mobile phone can do nearly as well. So when we look at mobile phones, they have incredible cameras now, and we will be in this project making use of mobile phones and the ease of which we can use them and how good they really are. So those are your different types of cameras. Okay, this is where we get a little bit more technical, because if we're thinking about understanding photography and we're thinking about the camera that's typically used most in the market, we are going to talk about how DSLR cameras work. So these are the cameras that you can buy with that reflex lens, but also mirrorless cameras work the same way too. So we have here a picture of a camera. The back of a camera, a DSLR camera, and it looks pretty busy. There's lots of different settings. There's lots of boxes and lots of pictures, and it can be really overwhelming when you're wanting to start photography and you see all of this stuff and you think, well, what does all this mean? So we're going to go through the top of the picture of the back of the camera there, where it says M 1/500, f5 and ISO 400. We're only going to look at those settings because these are the settings that as a photographer we're interested in, because they give us creative control, which again is how we influence how the image looks. So we're going to start with this one here, this M that I've highlighted in red. This is the mode of the camera. Now, cameras have different modes that you can put them into. And if you can see at the top right of the picture of the back of the camera, there is a little dial. And then in the second red box, there is another dial. This is the mode dial. And this essentially is how you can control how the photo is taken. So we have on this dial lots of things. On the right-hand side of the dial, there's lots of pictures. There's something called scene. There's something called effect. We're actually going to ignore those because we're pro photographers and we're interested in the letters instead. Those other settings will give you presets for certain situations. But if you're learning about photography, you're going to want to go straight to using settings in a way that makes you feel like you're taking the photo. So on the left-hand side of that dial, we have got several things: a green auto button, which has a little camera icon. We've got a P, an S, an A, and an M. And all of these are different modes. So let's go through them one by one. We have auto, which is, as it would suggest, it's automatic. You point the camera at the subject, whatever that might be, and you hit the shutter and the camera takes the photo. It decides all of the settings for you. You don't have any creative control over that. The camera will automatically look at the environment, see how bright it is, see how dark it is, and it will adjust the settings for you. That's really useful for if you're at a party and you're just wandering around snapping people, or you're just doing some candid photography, because it's nice, swift, and you're probably going to get a good result. But then if you want to start changing how your camera looks, you might want to look at other modes. So starting from the top, M is for manual at the top of that four-letter MASP there. Manual means that you control every single setting. You decide how the camera takes the photo, you decide how it looks, and you get to have that full creative control. This is really helpful, particularly for more nuanced or niche areas of photography, like wildlife photography, like astrophotography, where you really need to be certain how the photo looks. Then you have something called aperture, or A. That will let you control one setting. So the camera will pick all the others and you will get to choose one. S is a very similar concept. You get to choose one of the settings, you get to choose the shutter speed, and the others are decided by the camera. And finally, P is for program. Program is where the camera will let you decide one of the settings that you want to. It can be any of them, and it will decide the rest for you. So all of these modes have different applications for the things you're trying to photograph, and that will make more sense as we look at what they mean. So the next setting that we're going to look at for DSLR cameras is this box here, and this is called the shutter speed. And this is a fraction that you can see on the screen here, but shutter speed is not always expressed as a fraction. But what the shutter speed is how long the shutter of the camera lets in light to the sensor. So remember we said before that light comes through the shutter when it's open, and it will go off the mirror or maybe not off the mirror, and it will go to the sensor. So the shutter speed is how long that happens for. So here on the back of the camera, we've got 1/500, which is 1/500th of a second. So that's a really quick shutter speed, but you can actually adjust that to mean several things. So if we have a little look down here, this box has got 3 examples of shutter speeds. So you can see that there is no fraction here. There is just a number, and it's the number in the middle. The top one says 5,000. So that means it's 1/5000th of a second. So it's super, super fast, really quick. The shutter is open and it's closed. There's barely any time for light to get in. Then the one in the middle, that says 125. So that is 125th of a second. So that's a bit faster than the 1/500. It's faster than it's slower than the 1/5000. So it actually lets in a bit more light, but not for very long. And then finally, the last shutter speed we can see at the bottom, that's 20 seconds. So that 20 with the 2 little quotation marks, that means 20 seconds. So a 20-second exposure, if you were to sit and count to 20, it's an extremely long time. Lots of light is coming to that sensor, and that tells you just how extreme you can go with the shutter speed. You can either let in barely any light, or you can let in lots of light, and that's really important. So that's one important setting, but the next one is actually the F number here. Now this F number is also called the aperture, and this is another way in which the camera decides, or you as the photographer decide, how much light is going to get into your camera sensor. And it refers to a mechanical, so it's not digital, it's a completely mechanical opening that sits behind the lens. And that mechanical opening can be really narrow, so nothing gets through it, or it can be really wide so that lots of light can get through it. And the number refers to how narrow or how wide that aperture is. And it's a little bit weird. You might think that a lower number means that it's wide, but actually a low number means that, means that it's narrow. But a low F number means that that aperture is very, very wide. So it means it can let in more light. So if you see an F number that's low, it means the camera has opened the aperture to let in more light. If you see an F number that's very, very high, it means that the camera is letting in less light. So we go from F 1.4 in some cases, all the way up to F22 and onwards. So the aperture can open and close to a huge range, and that really, just like the shutter speed, lets in more or less light. So you're probably seeing a theme here. The photographer is all about the light in the environment, the light in the room, and how they can control how that comes into the camera. And finally, the last thing to mention about photography is this value called the ISO value. Now, the ISO value is not something that controls how much light comes in, but it's a value that will take the light already having struck the sensor, and it will make that light brighter, and it will make the image brighter too. So the ISO here is 400. And the value, if it's higher, means that the camera has brightened the image more. And every time you double the ISO number, you brighten the image by a factor of 2. So it gets twice as bright. And this can be really important for if you have used your other settings to do a specific thing, but that means that you've let in less light. So let's take the example of a bird in flight. If we want to snap that bird, we want to capture it in that moment, we're going to have to be really, really quick about it. But that means we're going to let in almost no light. So we can actually offset that by raising the ISO number, and that will make the photo brighter. So we can use these three settings together in something that we call the exposure triangle to balance our photographs and make sure that they look how we want them to look. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing we want to talk about briefly is something called focus. Now, I've deliberately not talked about something called focal length, which is the number on your lens, which you can zoom in and out. And that's because you can play around with that at your own sort of will. It doesn't really affect too much in an overt way how the picture looks. You will figure out how to use that as you just kind of explore. But focus is really important, and focus appears on the lens of the camera and sometimes on the body of the camera too. And you have two modes for focus. You have something called manual focus, where you twiddle it yourself and you figure out the focus point, which means when the picture is sharp. And then you have autofocus, where the camera does it for you. So you have that option with focus too. You can either manually do it, or you can get the camera to do it for you. On the focus dial, if you're doing it manually, you'll see there's lots of numbers, lots of markers, and that will tell you where the focus point is. So if it is a 1 meter marker, it means that you're focusing 1 meter in front of the camera. And then if you get all the way through the focuses and you go to this small figure of 8 that you can see on the screen that's circled, that's the infinity marker. And that tells you that as much as it can, the camera has focused everything from the foreground all the way to the background, all the way out there into space. So that's a little note on focus. Cool. So what do these settings look like in action then when we're thinking about them in practice? How do they affect our photographs? Because that's a lot of information. That's a lot of information that can be really hard to digest. So what does it mean when we look at a photograph? So we've got several examples here of different settings that maybe we can see how it affects things. So here we have a long shutter speed. This is a photograph of Loch Ness, and it was actually taken at night. So it's actually not during the day. So we have smooth water here, and we can see that the water normally would be ripply, but because we have a long shutter speed, we have captured that motion of the water and it's smoothed it out. So if we're wanting to capture motion, we can use a long shutter speed, and we can see that in the water. Here we have a short shutter speed. So this is a very fast shutter speed. And there's two little ducks here that I saw, and they were just bobbing about in the water. And then they both put their heads under at the same time. And I thought, oh, got to get that. That's really cute. Let's get a photograph of that. But of course, if I use a long shutter speed, they're going to have bobbed up and swam away in that time. So I used a really short shutter speed, and I captured them with their heads under the water. I also caught all of the ripples, so you can see the motion is frozen here. We don't have that smooth kind of glassy tabletop look to the water. We've captured motion, and these are the two extremes. And you'll often see that landscape and astrophotographers will use longer shutter speeds to let in light, and you can often see that wildlife photographers will use those short shutter speeds to capture that moment of the animal doing something cool. And then we can see F numbers. So F numbers are a little bit different when we're trying to see them in practice, because F numbers combine with other things like the focus point of the camera, and they also combine with how much of the image will be sharp, because the F number will affect a little bit whether the edges are blurred. But usually what we find with lower F numbers is that the background of the photographs will not be as sharp. So here in this portrait picture that you saw, the focus is on the subject in the foreground, but also the F number is very, very low. And that helps to keep that foreground sharp and the background not so sharp. So it's a combination of a couple of things, but rule of thumb, low F number, the background is not as sharp. And then if we have a high F number, we're going to have less light being let in, but also the whole image will be sharp. So it's probably the trickiest to get your brain around, but your low F number, lots of light, but not a sharp background. And then your high F number, you've got less light, but more of the image will be sharp. And that's something to think of. It does combine with your focus. So that's always something just to experiment with and see how you like it. So that's probably the most complex. So I hope that made sense. So the last one is the ISO, which is the value that gets brighter by 2 every time you double the number. So this photo here is darker. It has an ISO value, I think, of 2500, which is still quite a high number, but you can see it's you can see what's going on. There's the Milky Way, there's some stars, and it's fairly well balanced. But then in this photo on the right, the ISO value is about 10,000. So it is much, much brighter. And we can really see that. Now, something you can't see in these small photos is that if I were to zoom in on these pictures, the higher the ISO value, the lower the quality of the image. It makes the image look a little bit grainy, and that's not always great. That's not always what you want. So ISO should be used with caution. I would say it would be used to get the effect that you want, but always remember the quality of your image. If that's something that you want to factor in, it will be affected by that ISO value. Okay, so that's how cameras work. That's photography in a nutshell, really much in a nutshell. Hopefully it wasn't too much information. If you do have any specific questions, please pop them in the comments below, but hopefully that all made sense. Now we're going to look at how those settings would affect taking a landscape photograph. So what can we observe of this photograph that we've already seen already? Well, we can see that it's daylight already. So there's lots of natural light in the environment. We don't need to worry about the photograph not having enough light naturally. We don't need any artificial light sources, and we don't need to adjust our settings to let in lots of light. We can also see that we've captured motion in this photograph. So the trees are very still, the clouds are very sharp, so they're not blurred. So this tells us that the shutter speed is quite fast, actually. It's not very slow at all, because if it was slow, the wind on that day would have moved the trees, it would have moved the clouds, and we would have a little bit of blurring. So we can actually think about those things and see how this photograph's been taken. So it's on auto, first of all. There is no reason and there is nothing in this image that makes us go, I need to control this, because the camera has enough information to be able to do its job. So we've actually put the camera on auto, and I'm going to show you what settings were on auto, how the camera came out. The shutter speed, as we thought, is really, really quite fast. It is 1/125th of a second. And then the F number that we've used, the aperture, has been auto selected at 3.5. And this is quite low, so it does let in lots of light, but we've got a lot that we want to have in this photo. We don't want the edges to look blurry, which would happen at even lower numbers, but we also don't want to darken it, which would happen at higher numbers. So the camera's gone for f3.5. And the ISO, because it's the least important value, here it's really low, it's only 100. We don't need to brighten this image. All of that light has come to us with that open aperture and that shutter speed. And the focus on this is to that figure of 8 figure on the side. It's to infinity. Now, later on, we will do an example of an astrophoto, and we will look at the settings. And for simplicity's sake, I've chosen this landscape because we focus at infinity. So focus is not something we're going to focus on too much. That's a funny joke. But we're always going to have it on infinity, just for these examples to make it a little bit simpler for us. So there we go. So the last thing in photography that's worth talking about is composition. And this is how the artist arranges a photograph so that it's pleasing, or so that it has the moment or the message that we want to talk about. So this is a really well composed picture, and it serves as a good example of how a landscape image can be very well done. I didn't take this one. It's got me in it, but I didn't take it. So kudos to the photographer, it's really good. So what we have here is a clear foreground subject. We have me stood on the beach in Indonesia, looking out into the water, going, really nice here. And the photo is nicely divided into what we call thirds. So you may have heard the rule of thirds in photography, which is where if you take the photograph and you split it up into 3 parts, usually the subject will be in the left or right third. But it's also a way of knowing how much of what feature in your composition is in what part of the photograph. So here, the top, we have got 3 panes of sky that are completely just all blue sky. Then we have the mountain range and the subject in the next 3. And then at the foreground, we have got 3 panes that have the rest of the foreground in. So we've got a clear kind of idea of what is where. The line of the shore, the beach here, you see the line of sand, and the line of the water actually leads your eye as a viewer of this photograph all the way to that mountain range, which then leads you across the horizon. So it's really well composed in that it leads you into the photograph in a nice way. And the photograph is mainly level. Now, if you're really particular, like I am, you can see it's not completely level, but this is a handheld photograph, so that's pretty good. If it was skewed, it might not be as good in its composition. So composition just doesn't focus on landscapes. It also is able to be utilized in any photograph. And here is a picture of my cat. I had to get her in here somewhere. My cat's very pretty, as you can see, and she's the subject of this photo. Now, she observes the rule of thirds in this composition quite nicely because her face is in the left part of this grid. So her face and her eyes are where we are focusing, are where the viewer is supposed to look first. And then you can see on the right-hand side at the back, there's the out of focus chair that she's sat on, and that's not as important. So it's not being focused on, it's not part of that. Your face is drawn just to her face there. So you can do these tricks of composition in any of your photographs, and just what really makes it work for you. So there we go. So that's photography. Hopefully that makes sense. And now we're going to move on to astrophotography. This is a different section of photography entirely. It's a very niche one, and it's one that I really, really love. So these are examples of astrophotography. And as you can see, we have got as varied or as different types of photography within astrophotography as we have in photography as a whole. So astrophotography in a nutshell is where the photographer is taking a photograph in an extremely low light environment, such as the nighttime, the twilight, or taking a photograph of something astronomical. So it could be a shape of stars. So in the bottom left of this slide, we have a picture of the observatory with some very clear constellations there. There is the constellation of Orion with his belt. Then above it, we have a picture of the moon. So this picture of the moon is artistic, and I've put these photos in because they are pieces of art rather than single exposures. And that's kind of what we're getting at with astrophotography as an art form. This moon is several photos of the moon put together into this beautiful artistic picture that we can see. And then we have these 2 photos in the middle, both of them very different. The top one, that glowing cloud, is a beautiful nebula, which is a space cloud taken with a telescope. So we're looking at space and taking a photograph with the telescope and camera combined. And then finally, underneath there, we have that picture of a couple looking out into the Milky Way. And that's a very creative astrophoto because it uses the people as the subject. Whereas the photo on the right of the Milky Way rising above the observatory, the subject there is the Milky Way. Absolutely. We want that lovely glowing band of the galaxy in the photo. But the photo with the couple shows us the focus there is them and their moment stargazing. So astrophotography is really neat. And I can see in the comments, Captain Quinn has said, what is the idea? And we know what the idea is. You've said it in a nutshell for me. We want to let in as much light from the stars as we can. That is the idea with astrophotography. And you can already see, even without these pictorial examples that I've got here, if we were to let the camera decide how to take the photograph on auto and actually on any of the other modes but manual, we would see that actually we'd struggle to get anything at all. So we actually, as photographers, need to have control over all of the settings to do astrophotography. It's really dark out there. The stars are very, very far away. We need to tell the camera what to do. We need those long exposures, we need those wide open apertures, and we might also need those ISO numbers to make the image brighter for us. So this comparison I've got side by side is to try and give you an idea of maybe what a photo would look like on auto of the stars and the aurora borealis, the northern lights, and then a photograph of one on manual. Now, I've actually lied a bit to you here because that photo that says it's on auto is not on auto. I wanted to show you something there, but if you took a photo on auto, that would just be a black square. You wouldn't see anything. I've taken the image on the right and I've put everything down as far as I can in terms of the exposure, the brightness, the highlights, the lights, just to kind of give you a comparison, but it's not a direct comparison. The camera on auto just will give you a black screen. So don't attempt it. You can, but it's probably not going to want to do it for you. So that's a comparison side by side of why you need those expert settings and to be able to manipulate the camera to let in as much light as you can. And that really is as much as we can do. Okay, so taking an astrophotograph. So astrophotographs or astrophotography, we're going to go through the settings like we did before with the landscape photograph. And here I've just made a note at the bottom that says we are using a tripod and a delayed shutter release because we are going to be working here with settings that are different, that are longer exposures, and we do not want to have any shaking on our tripod or in our picture. We can't do this handheld. So we put the camera on the tripod to make it stable. And we also would like to have the shutter going off after we've pressed it, not as we press it. So those are things to consider. So the mode is manual, and this camera was taken by Canon by my colleague Dan. So we are controlling the shutter speed, the aperture and the ISO, whereas before with the other photograph of the landscape, we controlled none of the settings. The shutter speed here is 15 seconds. So the camera is open to light for 15 whole seconds, which is why the tripod is really helpful. Now, the camera can do longer, but my colleague didn't want to let in too much light. Now, that might seem like a contradiction to what I've just told you, but remember, we capture motion when we have a long shutter speed, and the stars appear to move as the Earth rotates. So Dan is very particular about having very pinpoint stars. So he's gone for 15 seconds. His F number is 2.8. So that means the aperture on his camera is incredibly wide. He has a lens that lets his aperture open to 2.8, and that lets in lots and lots of light. He could have put it at 3.5 and he would have been okay, but the image would have been a bit dimmer. Because he's at 15 seconds, he's gone for the lower F number, the wider aperture to help get more light in. Always dependable Canon, I can see in the comments there. I'm a Nikon user, so but no, Canons are very, very good. All of the starter cameras for Canons and for Nikon, they're excellent. So yeah, Canons are always very dependable. And then the ISO value that we've used here, or that Dan's used, is around 6400. So it's really, really high, really, really high. And that's to help offset the fact that he's not exposing for 30 seconds, he's exposing for 15. So we've raised the ISO and we've made it brighter by doing that. Now, Dan is a pro, and he's actually done something with these images called post-processing, which is where he's taken the images as they've come from the camera and he's enhanced them to bring them out the features that he wants, to make them look how he wants. So if you take a photograph of a similar area or a similar sort of thing, a building with the Milky Way over, and it doesn't look quite the same, always remember that I'm actually showing you photographs from people who have been doing this for a long time, and that they have post-processed these images, which means that they are good on you, Philip, for using Nikon. Excellent. They have used software to help them make the image how they want it to be. The focus again is to infinity. So we are at that small figure of 8 symbol that is on the lens, and we're focusing all the way to infinity to make sure from the foreground all the way out into the universe we're nice and sharp. So there we go. So let's compare. This is a really, really text heavy slide, but it does help just put those values side by side so we can see exactly what they do. So we can see the mode has changed from a well-lit landscape environment from auto to manual. We have full creative control in this way. We can do everything we need to do to make the photograph look how we want it to do. The shutter speed has gone from being 1/125th of a second to 15 seconds, which lets in far more light. The f number, or the aperture, hasn't changed all that much, but it does affect how much light is let in. So always the lower f number in astrophotography. It lets in far more light. And then dramatically, the ISO number in this comparison we have here, from 100, which is negligible, it's basically not there, to 6400, which is a very large number, brightening our image up nice and clear. And the focus for that simplicity, I have kept at infinity for you. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can see why, when we were talking about photography in general, we did spend quite a lot of time thinking about how the camera took the photograph, because astrophotography requires you to do all of the heavy lifting with those settings to really pull the stars out and to make a beautiful photograph. So here are some more examples of astrophotography. I wanted to show you these because they demonstrate several techniques and several different styles. They're from several different photographers that we have at the observatory, from myself to, we have two Dans, so we've got two Dans who've got photograph here, to a guy who I work with called Adam. So we have all got a different style of photography, and you can see that in these different photographs. We have some which are very technical and that are very, very pretty. For example, the one in the middle is a star trail, which is where we have deliberately wanted to capture the motion of the stars over time. And we've actually got this swirling vortex-like image where all of those stars, their motion is captured. And that looks really beautiful. And that's the shutter speed doing that. So long shutter speed, lovely star trails. And you'll notice they are converging on a single area. They're actually converging on our North Star, which astronomers love to photograph star trails around, because it is around the point that the stars will appear to rotate. The North Star sits directly above the Earth's axis of rotation. And so we find that if you photograph the stars over time, they will appear to rotate around that point. And it makes for a really cool photo. We can see on the left, we have Adam. He's taken a selfie in front of the Milky Way, which is really cool, a very striking silhouette. A little bit, you know, cheesy, but I like it. And I think he took that in Tenerife, as was the star trail photo. And you can see he's got a very neutral color there. He's got lots of browns in the Milky Way. He's got lots and lots of stars and detail in the Milky Way there. And then underneath, you've got one that I've taken when I was relatively new to astrophotography, and it's completely different to Adam's. It's more blue. There is less detail. The stars look a little bit sharper and not as soft. The building is the focus there, the angle of the building, and it's actually cutting through the photograph on an angle. So you can see two totally different styles, two totally different photographers, both of them astrophotography. The one in the middle with the halo is a beautiful moon halo that's captured from the observatory. And that's one of Dan Monk's. And you can see he's got a very particular style with his photography. His stars are always very, very soft, and his colors are always kind of neutral. So you could go on all day about all these different types of photographs, but it just is a great example of how all of these astro photos are completely different, even though they have the same objective of capturing the stars. And when we look at the project goals, what we want you guys to do, we're not expecting this because we're going to ask you to use mobiles, but it gives you an idea that you can be really varied with what you do with your camera at night. And just to kind of touch then on a form of astrophotography that I love that doesn't involve using a DSLR on a tripod, it's actually deep sky astrophotography. And I love deep sky astrophotography. Now, what is that? That's where we take our camera, we take the lens off, so we don't want that lens. We can do deep sky photography with zoom lenses, but all of these were taken with telescopes. So the big picture in the bottom there, that's one of our instruments at the observatory. It's our 16-inch Meade telescope. It's a beautiful instrument. It's on its mount, pointing through the window of the observatory there, the doors. And what you can do is you can take the eyepiece off the telescope. You can put your DSLR camera with a specially adapted filter on, or you can use another type of astrophotography camera called a CCD. We'll not talk about those, but they're really cool. And you can take a photograph of an object in space. And these are some examples of objects I have photographed with cameras on telescopes. Some of them are from when I was just getting started. Some of them are more recent. So you can see with astrophotography, the learning curve means that you will only get better as you do more. And the reason I love this form of astrophotography, it's slightly more advanced, but it's very worthwhile, is because when we look at these objects, some of them are millions of light years away. So the swirling left-hand-most picture, the second one down, that is a galaxy about 25 million light years away. And we managed to collect the light from it with our telescope and our camera. And I made a really quite pretty photo. The one above and below are the remnants of stars that have died. So our sun has a limited lifespan, and one day it will blow up. And when we look at it, it might look a little bit like the one on the top left, a glowing ring of ejected gas and dust. And the one at the bottom is a much larger star that died to create a supernova. So these are really cool moments in time that we've captured. And then the other two photographs that we can see, the one on the left, the glowing disk, that's our closest galaxy to us, the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years away. And then in the middle is the Orion Nebula, a really famous astronomical object that people love to photograph, and I'm no different. So you can see, if you're doing astrophotography on the ground of landscapes, of, star trails, of people stargazing, you've got loads to work with. If you're doing it with a telescope, you've also got lots that you can do. So sky's the limit. Ooh, bad joke. Okay, so how does this relate to mobile astrophotography? It's really important to look at astronomy and astrophotography and think about mobiles too. So mobile astrophotography is really interesting because you can do mobile astrophotography, first of all. So that's really important. You can take photos of the stars and of objects in space with your mobile phone, which is tiny, right? And it's not a great big honking camera that you have to do the settings for. It's just a small thing that you carry with you, which is incredible. So the same principle as DSLR photography is that the mobile, when it's taking a photo in a low light level environment, it's trying to let in as much light as it can. And the phone will also need to be kept very, very still. Now, what's great about this is if you've listened, if you're, families, children, you've listened to what I've told you and you've thought, that's a lot of information, I can't really take all that in and then do something with it straight away. The great thing about mobiles is you don't have to. It will do all of that work for you. The thing to remember is that it will look different to the other photographs I have shown you because the sensors on these cameras are smaller and they don't have the mechanical stuff going on that a DSLR does to give you some of that high quality picture. So the quality might be lower and the quality will vary with the mobile phone that you have. So that's something important to remember. But creativity is amazing. You can still do remarkable things with your mobile, especially if you take multiple photos and you're a bit of a wizard and you process them in some process software. So you can absolutely be wonderful. So on the screen here, we do have 3 photos taken with mobiles. The one on the left is the Orion constellation, so some stars. And then the 2 underneath the text is, they are actually the planet Saturn and the moon. So these are taken with telescopes. And where I said before that you can take the lens off a camera and put the camera itself with an adapter, here you just need to hold the phone up and stay really, really still to take the photo. So you can still get something cool. And if you're thinking, right, I like the sound of this, I like the sound of being able to participate in this kind of exploratory looking at the stars with my phone thing, but I don't have a new mobile, I've got an iPhone 8 or whatever it is. If you've got an older phone, you can still do something creative, so never fear. We will go through examples of what you can do with your phone if it's an older model. Okay, So which phone should you be using for astrophotography? So I've picked out the 4 main phones that you should really be looking into if you want to do astrophotography. If you're lucky, you might already have one of these because maybe you update your phone. If you don't worry. As I say, we will look at what to do even if you don't have a newer mobile. So don't worry about it. So the first type of phone I'm going to mention is the good old iPhone. So to do mobile astrophotography, you are going to need an iPhone 11 Pro. Hopefully it will be a Pro, but even the iPhone 11 has a dedicated night mode. And that's typically what you will find with mobile phones. They have a mode called night mode, and that's how they do their nighttime and astrophotography. So the iPhone 11 has a night mode. The Pro has a night mode that's a little bit better. The iPhone 12 is the superior model to get if you can, but again, don't worry. The exposures on the iPhone 11 go up to 10 seconds, and they go even higher on the newer models with some advanced features that help to control the other settings like the aperture and the ISO. So the iPhone 11, I am sorry to break it to you, it is the worst out of the bunch in terms of how it scores with astrophotography. It does okay, it can still do cool things, but it is not the best one of the bunch, but it can still do good things. Some people are really interested in the performance of how these phones compare to each other, and although they're all brilliant, the iPhone is last. The next one that I would recommend is the Samsung Galaxy S20 or onwards. Now the Samsung is really quite good. It does have a 15-second and upwards exposure time that you can adjust yourself, and it has what we call a good dynamic range when it's being reviewed. What that means is it can expose the photograph and make it look very balanced. So none of the colors are too bright or too dark, or none of the areas are too bright or too dark. It is a very balanced photograph. So it scores well when we look at that. So it is a mid-range astrophotography phone if you want to put them next to each other. And next we have the Google Pixel 4 and onwards. So Google has got a really nifty camera. So the Google Pixel 4 is pretty excellent. It has really good night sight, and along with having some great customization, you can alter the features, take long exposures. It also has features that help you to edit and compose your photographs in darkness. So it gives you that little additional help to make your astrophotos look really good. So Google Pixels, they're really good. And then the best of the bunch, and I know Roy's got one of these, is the Huawei P40 Pro. And the P40 Pro in the Huawei range and onwards, so these are the minimum spec or specification of phone that you need to get. These are the best of the bunch. So the Huawei is not only doing what all the other phones do, which is taking long exposures and letting you alter other settings, it also has features for particular types of nighttime photography, such as an ultra wide angle lens, a zoom feature, and lots of different things that you can customize. So if you want like the best of the bunch, Huawei. It's simple as that. But any of these brands of phone and the make and model that's listed onwards will be able to get you stars and the Milky Way to some extent. So you will be able to see those faint stars glowing on your photographs nicely, and they will have the capabilities to do these long exposures. If you don't have this specification of phone, don't worry, because there's plenty you can do. And as I say, we'll get into that. So night mode on mobiles then. It's really quite simple. It's lovely. It normally pops up automatically in darkness. So you can, at nighttime, whip out your mobile, get the camera open, and you can point the mobile at the sky with one of these models, and it will automatically go into night mode. Night mode is always denoted or symbolized by a crescent moon. It might have some dashes on it, it might have a little circle behind it, but night mode is universally a crescent moon. So that's how you know that you're on night mode. So some phones, to access night mode, instead of popping up automatically, and Samsung, we're looking at you, you do have to swipe right to get to them. So if you swipe right on your camera screen, you will access night mode. Or if you're Samsung, like this one, it's got lots of options on the right, you will get lots of different things that you can do, but you can select night. You can choose the exposure time if you want to on most phones, and that is on the iPhone that's on the middle of the screen. That is the slider that you can see on the arrows from 2 seconds. You can increase that as much as you need to. Or you can let it choose automatically. The automatic selection on this iPhone is listed there as 3 seconds. Can you see? So you can either let the camera decide, much like it being on auto as a DSLR, except at night, which is amazing, or you can decide yourself and have more creative control. Then you need to stay really still. So this is why if you are photographing, you need to have a way of keeping your phone still. You can't just hold it, because you will move a little bit and then you'll be really upset. So you don't necessarily need a tripod that's adapted for a phone, although you can get those and you can buy one. You can use furniture in your garden if it's not wet. You can take out a stack of books or something to lean your phone on while you're composing the shot. So you can get really inventive with how you keep your phone still, but you can, of course, use an adapted tripod. So there we go. That's as easy as it is. So we spent most of the workshop talking about photography from a viewpoint of cameras. And then when it comes to mobile, what's wonderful is that it does it all for you. So it's worth having that underpinning knowledge, because if you've got a mobile and you're doing a bit of photography, a bit of astrophotography, and then you want to get a DSLR, you're already armed with the knowledge of how to do so. But the mobile is great. It does it all for you. So what we have here on the screen are some examples of what you can do with different capabilities of camera. So not all of these phones have night modes, which is interesting, because we kind of have looked at night mode and seen how it's integral to taking those long exposures. So what we have on the top left are 2 photos of the constellation of Orion. These were taken with, I think, Samsungs. So these were taken with phones that have the night mode capability, and they can capture those stars nice and crisp. And you can also see there's color in the stars. And so the photographer here has managed to compose these photographs in such a way that we have a clear subject, which is the constellation, and a foreground. In the case of the image on the left, it's a wall. I think it's part of the wall along somewhere in Northumberland. And then we have a camera on the right. So we have 2 very distinct subjects. Underneath them are 2 photographs of telescopes that were not taken with a camera with night mode. These photos were taken with an older mobile phone, an older iPhone, and they were light painted, which means that I've used a red light here to light up the telescope quite a lot in the dark room, and then I've taken a photo. And you might say, well, Tash, that is not astrophotography. That's a picture of a telescope that you've lit with a red lamp. Well, the idea is you're telling a story, are you not, with this photo? You're making a statement. You are being creative and exploring darkness using light. And red light is very important to astronomers. It gives us the ability to look around us and not fall over, and keep our dark adapted vision that we need for stargazing. So this photograph here is almost an expose of an astronomer's practice. It's what they do in the dark kind of thing. It's shining a light in a safe way on the telescope. So it is still, I would consider, an astrophoto, but it's using that creative edge to tell a story with technology that can't do what the photos above can. So you can still be very creative. We then hop along to the right of the 3 photographs that are portrait. And these 3 photographs were not taken with phones that can do nighttime photography. So I'm just giving you some examples, and you can see these ones are less traditional in the sense that they do not have stars in them, but what they do have is interesting features, and they have that theme of exploring darkness. So the first one on the left is somebody's garden lit up at night, and it's almost inviting you to walk out into the darkness with those paved stones and the snow that helps them to stand out. The snow is very reflective, so it makes the photo nice and bright. And we can see that that's actually quite interesting. there's the clear sky above. We can't see any stars, but it's almost telling us that we can go out and stargaze. So it's telling a narrative still, even without being able to capture stars. The photo next to it is, again, a little bit strange. There are no stars here, but there's some funny colors, and there's some lines of captured motion from a bonfire that somebody was doing. And there's the tree that's, glaring in red on the right-hand side. And that might remind you of something in space. Maybe it reminds you of a nebula or a gas cloud in space, and it's caught your imagination. And you can be creative in that respect. And then finally, the most obscure of the three, but one of the most creative, you can see all of these out of focus circles on this photograph here. This was taken with an older phone. And what it actually is a light, a very, not a very bright light, but enough of they experimented with the brightness. It's of raindrops on a window that they're shining a light behind. And the raindrops are out of focus. The camera can't focus on them. And they took a photo of that, and it almost looks like out of focus stars, which, if you can remember some of the other photographs we looked at, photographing out of focus stars can look really cool. So they've recreated stars in this photograph with an older model. And then above those, these photos were taken with newer model phones with night mode. But they can show you how actually, if you have a small telescope and you pop your camera up to the eyepiece of the lens, you can capture an object in space with your mobile. And you can do this to a degree with phones that are older and phones that do not have night mode. So it's worth including in this little collage. The one on the left, the ringed planet, that is Saturn. And then the one on the right is the moon. And the moon, typically when you look at it, people like to photograph it looking nice and sharp. But I liked this photo because the moon is covered in haze here, and the haze is streaking across the edges, and it makes it look really nifty and interesting and mysterious. And that to me is a cooler, more artistic photograph than just the moon on its own. So you can see how even if you don't think your phone is capable of capturing actual stars, if it's not a new model, you can do plenty of strange creative things to tell a story of darkness. So there we go. So here are the tips for mobile astrophotography in the dark, trying to get a nice image. Find something interesting first and foremost. So find something that catches your attention. Now, this can be a constellation like Orion, or it can be the Milky Way if it's the right time of year. It might even be a brightly colored star that's above a tree line. It might be something that just makes you go, that looks really nifty. I'm going to get that. It might be a building by moonlight. Moonlight is a really good friend for an astrophotographer using a phone, because moonlight will shine down on your environment and make it brighter. And so your phone will be able to take a nice clean photo. The bottom right picture here, this is of the observatory with the moon shining through this thick cloud, giving us a nice moon halo you can see. So that makes it quite an interesting photo. And something that tells a story would be my next tip, particularly if you are struggling with not having a new phone, because I'm not telling you to go out and buy a new one. If you have a new phone, I want you to really impress me. No, I'm joking. You can take photos of stars, constellations. You can try and focus a little bit more traditionally. But if you are unable to do that, or you're finding it's not working as well for you and you're dissatisfied, finding something that tells a story is really worthwhile. So the picture at the top you can see was taken with a mobile. It was taken with my old iPhone before I got my iPhone 11. And what it shows you is the shadowy outlines of all of the wind turbines on the horizon. I'm actually driving home from work here, and the sun is rising because I finished work at 3 and I was driving home. This is about 3:45 in the morning when I was going home. And these lovely, that ghostly light of the sunlight, the shape of the wind turbines, and the road leading you down the photograph that's brightly lit. That's an interesting story. That's a composition. That's something that is actually quite fun. So you can see you can get very creative with these things. If you take a red light, that will also help you to be creative. The bottom left photo there is of a telescope that's lit by a red light, tells a story just like the other ones did. And if you do have a telescope, and as I say, you want to take a photograph through the eyepiece, holding your phone up to the lens of the eyepiece very still will do that for you. It does take a bit of practice, but it looks really cool when you can manage it. So there we go. Okay, so hopefully all of that made sense. So what are we asking you to do in this project with all of this information? Well, what we want you to do is to go out into your local area and take a photo with your mobile phone in darkness. This can be of the nighttime sky. This can be of, as we've spoken about, constellations or features in the nighttime sky in astronomy. It can be of things related to your exploration of darkness. So it can be telescopes, or maybe it can be something you've spotted that's, peering out from you in the darkness, like those wind turbines. Whatever it is, we want you to go out and photograph it. We want you to think about how you explored the darkness around you, and how that made you feel, and what your relationship is to astronomy. If there's no relationship with astronomy and you're discovering darkness for the first time, let's reflect that in your work. Let's reflect that in your experiences. We also want you, if you can, we would love to see a little bit of almost like a documentarian style of your mission into the dark skies to escape the Earth's gravity, as we want to put it. We want to see any more photographs you've taken. Maybe you planned your trip out, you've got a thermos and you've got your coat on, and and you can photograph these elements of your planning and preparation. Maybe you like to draw and like to paint, and maybe you're inspired to do something like that, a drawing or a painting that tells us about what darkness and the dark skies mean to you. Maybe you are really into poetry, a short piece of writing, something that tells us your story of the stars and how the universe has made you feel would be absolutely incredible. What we want you to do is submit your work. And again, this is aimed really at children, young people, and families. So if you want to do this as a family, that is absolutely awesome. If you're an adult doing it, that is also awesome, because I can then say, give me really good work, right? So you should submit your work to natasha@kielderobservatory.org during February and March. We've extended the project to March just to give people a little bit more time to go out and do it and to feel like they've got stuff that they're happy with. Now, all of that artwork, all of that photography, and all of those journeys into the dark skies around us will actually be made into a really cool online exhibition which celebrates dark skies. It ties in really nicely with the Dark Sky Festival. It ties in really nicely with the fact that we all can't go anywhere. And so if we can explore the universe creatively, we've at least gone somewhere, right? And so hopefully we will get some really, really good result. And as Roy said in the comments, there is no age limit for these, for the photographer or for the participant. Anyone can join in. And what I will just do is show you that everybody that has participated today, I think I have an email list of the people that got the Eventbrite link. In that case, if you've attended through Eventbrite, you will be getting an email with a resource pack. This resource pack will have an incredibly detailed astrophotography, photography, and mobile photography guide. It will be this presentation times a bajillion. It will be very detailed. So it will hopefully serve as a great FAQ and resource for you moving forwards. It will also have a printable activity sheet for the younglings in your family that they can use to help to document how they feel about the activity. If you're on the chat or you see this, because we've recorded it and we might put it out at a later date, if you see this presentation at a later date, please, if you want to be part of the activity, email me at natasha@kielderobservatory.org, and I will get these resource packs to you, and then I will be in touch with you and you can be in touch with me to participate. So those that have the Eventbrite link, I will get these to you. Those that don't receive them, if I've dropped the ball somewhere or aren't through Eventbrite invitations, please do email me and I will get the resource packs and the details to you. So there we go. So that's everything I've got to go through. I think I took a little bit longer than I originally planned to, but hopefully that was enjoyable. Any questions, request a resource pack, submit work to that email there. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Great, Natasha, thank you very much. That was excellent. The only question I've had it's been sent through social media, which was, are there any children age restrictions, do you think? And I think you might have already answered that.
There aren't really. What we would say is if a child who is very young is wanting to do it, that's fab, because as we've said, mobile astrophotography, it's super easy. The help of an adult will be very important, because we're not expecting any child to wander out alone into the darkness.
Yes.
We want to, I didn't mention this, thank you so much, Roy. We want to make sure if you do participate, make sure you take an adult with you, you wrap up warm, yes. You always take lights and safety features with you, but there is no age limit. We want everybody, if they feel inspired, to go out and to photograph the sky with their mobile with the help of a parent. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, safety first, and obviously at the minute we're all in lockdown, so we very much have to think about how far we can go and what we can do. So that's great. I know you mentioned the mobile phones, and I've had the S20 and the S30. No, hold on, what have I had? S9, S10, and S20 on the Samsung, and all of those have Pro mode. So, and the Huawei, I started off with the P20 Pro, and that had a night mode as well and a Pro mode. And the Huawei's also have a Star Trail setting as well, which is really cool. So if I can add and reiterate to what you've said there, I think people, whatever phone you've got, just have a look in the camera settings. You might be quite pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely.
Lots of good feedback, lots of thank yous. Nicely done, Tasha. Excellent and informative presentation and so on. I've put your email in the chat, so that'll be there for all of posterity. And
thanks, guys.
I can't see. I mean, you're looking at the chat as well, I think, aren't you, Tasha?
I am, yeah, I've got the chat up. And yeah, definitely for the safety considerations. We're not asking just to randomly go out in the dark. I thought it went without saying, but it's very important to reiterate: be safe, go with people you know, and make it fun.
Yeah, good plan. Well, I think then I'm going to end the live stream, not the Zoom, so Natasha. So I'll end the YouTube live stream now. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, everybody.
Really enjoyed that presentation. And everybody else on the world of YouTube, we will see you for the rest of our events over the course.